All right, this is part two, and if you're watching part two and haven't seen part one, at the very end of this series, you can go in the top left-hand corner and it'll go back or start it over in the first of the series. We just recently were talking about their giant effect and how they were so much taller than the people that had been there before. And so many of these people, 6'6" and so on, that they have found the burials of and so on. And this goes all the way through into China and the Tarim Basin mummies that they've found up in there. But now we're on past that, and we're talking about the Scythians and the legends about themselves. But this legend about themselves, which portrays the first Scythian king as Targetus, as the child of the sky god again, and of a daughter of the Dnieper. Well, the Dnieper is a river that's way the hell over here, and so she would be now daughter of the Dnieper. This was the river god that had been there from before. And those people, just calling it off the name of the river that they ran off of, and said that they were connected between there. This, though, is a somewhat later alliteration, for this is whenever that storm god seems to come in again with pantheons. And whenever they say the Scythians do this, it's a legend about themselves. It was a legend about a certain group of Scythians that they had ran into and they were talking to them. Now, this Targetus here allegedly lived 1,000 years before the failed Persian invasion, but let's let Robert confirm it and say it.
Allegedly lived 1,000 years before the failed Persian invasion of Scythia, around 1500 BC. He had 3 sons, before whom fell from the sky a set of 4 golden implements, a plow, a yoke, a cup, and a battle axe. Only the youngest son succeeded in touching the golden implements without them bursting with fire. And this son's descendants, called by Herodotus the royal Scythians, continued to guard them.
So that's pretty neat. Now we have another tale of somebody who had 3 sons that broke all out, but the youngest one didn't have the same issues as the oldest one. But it might go with stories a little bit. If you pick it apart even more, it seems to go with stories, but it seems to go with a portion of the stories that are in there and an offshoot of it, and it has to do with Isaac. And we looked at Isaac and Kurgan burials and who that is, and way up here, and how could that connect? Well, the 12 tribes situation. And we've tried to make connections, and he'll make a few of those here and shortly, but let's just continue. I'll probably get flagged, so I've got to stop it right there and say something else. But taking a look at this, this is what we were looking at up close, and this is nothing more than a necklace adornation that's very much like the Egyptians, although theirs was mainly done out of beadwork. These people dealt in solid gold in situations and didn't do so much of the beadwork. There were other people that did beadwork, and in fact it seemed like beadwork is what got a lot of people going in the whole thing, but there were people that did specialized beadwork that took it to another level, that kept pressing the issue with everyone else, and that kind of ran each other. But there's also special stones that people wanted for their beadwork, and this kept the market definitely going because they're getting lapis lazuli from way over here in Afghanistan and getting amber from way up over here in Europe and stuff, way before anybody talked about a Silk Road or Marco Polo or anything like that. If you'll look here, though, what this is a series of torques, which everybody's familiar with in Britain and the stories from in there, and I've even showed them in videos recently, but it's a series of torques here that run around. It's torques that come around, and it's really twisted ropes done extremely fancy. And if they look up close at it, in between each one is these little dots that are around on there. And how many dots are there? There's a zillion freaking dots they've made put into this specialized type thing. But also, strangely, we see that golden fleece idea and these people that were Colchians and stuff, and it'll all start to make more connections as we keep going. And this is just somebody on the side that's doing Paint It Black. And it sounds like it's a weird, perhaps, um, key to be playing in, scale to be playing in. Sounds very Middle Eastern somehow, and Turkish and things like that, doesn't it? Well, that's because some of those scales come from the names of ancient people that lived in that area, like Lydian, Locrian, Dorian, Phrygian. They're all scales from people in that area, and their music, whenever you come through it there, because of that subtle note change that are in each one, gives you certain sounds. We've talked about this too, also in sacred geometry, and how this all works together, and how these people had it figured out a long time ago. But he's going to talk about hermaphrodites and how they're connected to each other, but there's a sacred symbology that goes with hermaphrodites. And we've talked about that in a few different videos, but it's not like the most outstanding thing. It's pretty much yin and yang in the way that it works with things, and being able to, a man having two on his shoulders talking. If you've been married, you know what I'm talking about. Let's continue.
I just love hitting the open road and telling people that liberty...
Really? I'm gonna hit a commercial right then out of nowhere, huh?
In another legend, as told by Herodotus, all Scythians were direct descendants of Hercules, who had 3 sons from a mythical beast whose lower part was snake-like and whose upper part was one of a hermaphrodite. The word hermaphrodite is a combination of the words Hermes and Aphrodite, and has occult interpretations that I've covered in previous videos. The lower serpentine body is similar to the legend of Melusine, which is the goddess used by Starbucks on their logo, which I also covered in a prior episode and will leave a link to in the description.
Now, that's kind of the reason I didn't do one on Melusine, because he actually, instead of making connections or doing things, made a straight up one. Again, this is Robert Sepper, and this is him himself right here, after getting a Starbucks coffee, and it's got that lady on it. Well, that's the close-up thingy of it, with a little wraparound that's got a, cardboard. If you look at the other symbology, it definitely has that double-tailed snake, and that's the idea of Melusine. He's got a great video that he does on it and makes some connections to things, but I generally stay in a time before that and before, because if we start getting too close, like we were talking about Huns and everything that came out of that, it starts to get quite personal to some people. And in fact, even though I do this, it gets quite personal to me, especially whenever I find out what's happened to certain heritages from other ones. So I try to shed that aside. Let's continue.
In 2017, another genetic study of the Scythians suggested that the Scythians were related to the Yama culture, also known as the Ochre Grave culture, dating to the Bronze Age around 3300 BC, which...
And we've made videos about that, and red ochre grave culture, and how red ochre grave culture goes way back when. In fact, he did a video on red ochre graves that I used a portion in my red ochre grave video that I talked over like this. But also, if we look here, there's these people that were called Celtic, Celtimen that are over here. And where the hell are we? Right now, we're right above the Caucasus Mountains. Here's the Caucasus Mountains and everything going on there. And we talked about their pottery and how it has connections to corded-ware people and people that ended up going over here in the very first Neolithic pottery situation coming into there, and a definite change in that. But until we had genetics, we weren't able to make total connections. But now we have. He's going to speak of a few.
Derives from its characteristic burial tradition with red ochre. The pits were called Yama. So as you can see, this area is bordering the north of the Caucasus Mountains, where Mount Ararat is located, and where we find the story of Noah and his 3 sons, which of course is part of the Hebrew Bible, or Old Testament. And it's interesting that, according to Herodotus, the Scythians did not eat pork and banned all swine from their territory. That said, let's look at some other names that are attributed to the Scythians.
Well, let's look at this map here real quick before he starts to say everything. What we're looking at here in the very center of it is the Caucasus Mountains, and so here's that region. Down here's the Mediterranean, okay? And here's Anatolia, which is also known as Asia Minor. And so everything outside of that little box over here is called Asia. And so we're talking about Asia. And these people like the Saka and the Sakasuni, it came from this area. But notice how the Massagetae now are not where they were before, but they're in this region that's right here. You see that? Also, we notice that in this area, the Colchis and the Colchians, and that was people of the Golden Fleece, but also Herodotus said that they were the same people as the Egyptians, for they had all these common customs. But they both remembered each other, but the Colchians remembered the concept and the connection from long ago more than they did so off of it. And it's like, well, they probably had this thing where they knew they had been part of that group that ended up making the pyramids and everything else, but they're way off over here, whereas the others wouldn't think about each other as much. But then again, in that time also, there were people through this area that had definite connections, and the Amarna letters and stuff that we talked about. And then you have Armenia, which actually goes with that, and the ancient Armenians, not Turkish people and stuff that came in another wave, but the people that were there at the time, and who were the Syrians and Persians, who we talked about, and how they said for themselves they were Aryans. And this comes from the people that supposedly let loose the Jews there, right? Cyrus the Great, now that's all comes from it. Darius, right? Cambyses before that, and so on. In fact, this is the Cyrus River. It's way up here. What? Yeah, the Medes, and where they're looking at right here, right now. People talk about horses and Bactria. Well, they had a definite big connection there, but that's the horses that had already been bred in different forms of looking more like a thoroughbred situation and looking more like a quarter horse and looking more like this, and for different purposes and pulling and things. That if you look into horses itself, there's a great lineage there, but the ones that came out of this are ones that we know as Persian show horses. They're close. One of their closest connectors is Lipizaners, but you also hear them as being Arabian stallions and so on. And they usually have Arabian print onto their neck. So here's something that changed in different form that comes out of them here. But let's see, there's the Scythian gates. What? And it comes through the Caucasus Mountains. It's actually these Pillars of Hercules situation that's sitting right here. And these people know the pass and the way that's through there. Here's Tanais, which is very much like Tanis. Here's the Don River. Dnieper is way over here. Sarmatians, though, are just right above that concept right here. And here shows horses, and they show them running that way, ironically. Well, we know that they came from that way and went this way at one time, now in reality. And then it came back the other way, and then, yeah, the snake bit him on his ass and everything. Here's the Danube, tribe of Dan, Thrace, and the Thracians that were there. So let's look at what he says about them and ancient people said.
The Encyclopedia Britannica states the terms Saka and Scyths were regarded as synonymous. Herodotus wrote that the Persians call all the Scythians Sakai.
So I've made a couple of videos, if you've been watching for the last couple of years here, about the Sakasuni and Sakai and the Isaac and Kurgan burials that are around there. And then you have the Saxons and Isaacsons, and how that works with the Angles, Anglo-Saxons, and this thing all works together. This pass and this is shown to be a gate that's actually a giant wood gate, somehow in the mountains, that's almost as big as the mountains. There's also something special in the mountains here in a crypt that's there in the Caucasus Mountains. That ironically comes out to being just about the area where we'd say that Abraham had run over, but no, this is where Noah landed, right there. The Abraham thing comes out of Sumeria, or out of northern Samaria, if you will, depending on if you're going to go with whichever he comes from, and the of the Chaldees, and if they're going off that in a later situation, which a lot of people agree with, and then coming down to Haran and the things that he does in that. But again, we find names in weird places. This is the Volga River that's running off here, and so here we have the major bodies of water out here in the Black Sea and the Bosphorus that's here. And Tanais is written there. But here we have Tokhari, the Tokharians, and they're over here. And what the hell, weren't they way out the picture over? Yeah, they used to be. But actually, whenever they did their genetics, they say, no, that's over people in Anatolia and Europe things. But where are their genetics now? Well, they're over in Europe, kind of. Oh, okay. But it's funny how they want to get real straight. This is the Caucasus Mountains, Mons, here. Cyrus River again. The whole situation. But did you notice Tartaria and where it is? Olam or Olim, Scythia. So here we are making a connection again that we've done with Tartaria before, and rolling through, and see what else Robert puts with along this while he's showing you this picture. For a lot of times he doesn't talk about the picture. You're supposed to help put that together, but you might look up names and you'll be like, where'd that come from? And you'll be like, oh.
There are historians that say that the Scythians belonged to the 10 lost tribes of Israel and were allied to what we call the Phoenician Empire.
Ding.
Linking the Scythian tribes to the Hebrew patriarch Isaac.
Ding.
According to the Bible, Isaac was the son of Abraham, who was, along with his wife Sarah, the first Israelite to enter the land of Egypt.
If you really look at the story, they were the first people that were ever going to be called Israelites, and that they were a cut-off branch of people that had lived somewhere way up over here, and they were coming down over here. That kind of goes with it too. So we look at this, and these are some of the agreed routes that the Phoenicians took and where they lived. And you go, okay, that's what you're calling Phoenicia, right? Okay, I get it. And it's just on the little edge over here, you know. And they went only here, but they never went over here, huh? Or there? Never? Never went to Italy, even though their stuff's definitely shown as being there, and having messed with the other guys living up over here, the Etruscans, and oh, no, you're going to go with that. But messed with Sardinia right there. Is that what you're going to go with? They only went this far. But they made maps that they said way out of these places. There were dragons in the sea and all that stuff too at the time. What the hell is up with that? Are these dragon people we were talking about? You barely see the name of it there, but Iberia. But didn't we see Iberia on the map a minute ago over here in the other spot? I don't think I pointed it out. You can go back and look at it. Think in that Tartaria map, it shows that little section, or it's another map coming up. Let's continue here as he goes on.
I can't go into detail regarding the lost tribes now, as that will require several videos to properly cover. But I will say that archaeologically speaking, there is an ancient city in modern Israel, just north of Jerusalem, that was once called Scythopolis, as you can see here on this map.
So here we're looking at this map, and there's Scythopolis right there. And so strangely, we can make a few other biblical connections right here, of course. There's Nazareth, which people have figured out did not even exist at the time. The Sea of Galilee, which is not even really a sea, but it used to be known as Lake Tiberias before this point. But Tiber is a shark, by the way. But at the same time, I mean, it's a huge lake for the area and everything like that, but at the same time, it didn't get that name until much after it. We see Hippos, and it has to do with horses who came in. Here's a Canaanite name, Kenatha, Dion, Gadara. These other names that don't necessarily go with it, but again, here we have one that sounds very Greek, and Joppa, that we always hear about in the Norse story, and that's right near Jerusalem right there, and Judea is only right below that, by the way. But up in here, we have the river of Jabbok. And this is where Jacob had to cross it. And people have said that's a strange conflagration of a name flipping. A lot of people have noticed that that's just a simple Hebrew flip of Jacob and Jabbok River, and the river god of that time that he had to fight all night. Well, that's the God of the Bible and everything. Really? He had to fight him all night, and then God couldn't win, so he had to cripple him, give him a hobbler in his side. You can take and knee somebody right in the side of their pit, of their leg, right in the side of it, and it'll really hobble you there. But many other stories that go along with it, where he had to grab his junk and other things that come out before this. So what is that? Well, there's people that, like Gilgamesh, who had Enkidu, and they wrestled all night, and it gets to the point and everything. Hold on, that sounds just like, yeah, it does, doesn't it? It's funny how all those connections keep happening over again. Here's a big one for you. They got a place right down here, and I know Caesar's connected to it, and we can talk about that, but we don't have to go into that, or Titus and things that come much later and end up going with the New Testament. But Scythopolis is right there on the path, and it ends up being part of the tales that come out of this area. You ever live in America and find Philadelphia? Everyone that comes from? Well, Philo is love, Delphi is the ancient oracles and so on. So there's connections, man, like crazy. But let's just continue.
Which brings us to another name the Scythians were known as, the Ashkenazi. In Hebrew, the word Ashkenazi means Germans, particularly communities along the Rhine River in western Germany and in northern France dating to the Middle Ages. Their language is Yiddish, which is a form of High German. Swabian is another Aryan language considered High German, which is where New Swabia, or Neuschwabenland in Antarctica, is named after. In the 19th century, the German theologian August Wilhelm Noble equated Ashkenaz with the Germans, deriving the name of the Asir from Ashkenaz. The Asir are the gods of the principal pantheon in Norse religion, including...
And I've made recent connections with this Asir that we talked about, and these goat people, and the satyrs, and try to make connections about telling you who were the elves and who were the brownies and who were all these different people off of the pixies and the fairies, and what has that got to do with? Well, he's about to get into it. But if you look at this simple depiction of Thor type situation with his hammer held high, look at that wheel. And ironically, whenever you build that three-part wheel, the Sumerians did it with this blockade and this H block type thing situation that with the two H blocks did work good. But hell, if you have metal and you can just reinforce it in this way, it's ironic how that wheel in the sky keeps turning round and round. And this ancient god that used to ride through the sky as a sun god had all this power that's going on with this situation. It makes far more connections, doesn't it?
including Odin and Thor.
So here we can see a common depiction of Thor, and it's been given, and a lot of people won't make the connection or possibly see that he has a swastika connected to him too, and all of this connects to an ancient people. Well, who were they? Were they the people that were there, or the people that came in? Or, yes. Well, then the people that came in later, they were bringing this, right? Yeah. But then who were they? Well, they were much after the original people that had come to help out the people that were there. And the closest related to them were the ancient people that were living all around the Mediterranean and up into Iberia and through the Celtic lands, pushing on that ice area. But at that last ice age, half that was covered with a mile of ice. There wasn't nobody living right up against it. or the Eskimos at that time, push down a little bit over here. Well, they look like now they're all, yeah, they're all in different places. Man, their area has expanded quite a bit, hasn't it? We go back to last global maximum, or 12,000, 13, 14, 18,000 BC, and hit the maximum point there and ride back onto it. Who were where? So, the name Ashkenazi derives from biblical sources.
Figure of Ashkenaz, son of Gomer, son of Japhet, and Japhet was one of the three sons of Noah. Japhet's tribe is considered to be the progenitor of European and, later, East Asian peoples. In other words, Indo-European or Aryans. Japhet is also equated with the Greek titan Hyksos, mentioned by Homer, the ancestor of the Hellenic people, named after Helen of Troy, whose bloodline was considered sacred, which I recently covered in a video about Mary and skull symbology. In the 7th century,
And I recently covered one about hell and the goddess that comes through, that he's not really going into there, and about the Hellenes or everything, and how that connects really back way back when, and how this rolls over each other, and it's just gone somewhat unmentioned from that. Hopefully you're making quite a few connections out of this, for there's a lot all through this video here.
Isidore of Seville, who is often regarded as the last scholar of the ancient world, published his noted history, in which he traces the origins of most of the nations of Europe back to Japheth. In Scotland, histories tracing the Scottish people to Japheth were also widely published. I have another video linked in the description about how Scotland got its name. Princess Scotta, ancestor of the Gaels, was also known as Meritaten, a daughter of King Akhenaten and Queen Nefertiti, and sister of King Tut, who were all part of the Hyksos dynasty of Egypt.
Now here's where I get a little odd connective with him. For everything that we've seen has shown that they weren't part of that connection. But that was 15th dynasty coming in, and these people we're referring to right now are the 18th dynasty. In fact, they were well after the people are well known to have kicked them out. Now we know that that works with the biblical idea, but I think he's trying to make the idea that that's maybe when the blue-eyed people came, because we talked about that before and how they would run into this area. But if you look at the dating on that, did they stop there? No, they didn't. For if you look at the earliest of dynasties of these guys, they have blue eyes. In fact, he's fixing to show them to you here. And so I've made a video of this same thing. In fact, one of the two videos that I did on Mariatin there and talking about Scotia was using his video at the same time, and it didn't record very well, but that's why I'm trying to use in his deal the secondary video source. But I got a little off there for a moment and about 5 or 6 seconds behind. But when we're looking at that, and he's saying they're the Hyksos pharaohs, but also he's showing you right here that Tutankhamun belongs to haplogroup 1 R1b1a2, and which is more than 50% of the men in Western Europe. In fact, it gets real strong, all the people in Northwestern Europe. She was known to have had red hair, and that carries on with a tradition that came through Mary, Queen of Scots, and so on. It goes on there. He's talking about Hyksos pharaohs, but this guy on the left, if you want to go with the later dating on him, he's from the 12th dynasty. And this is Horaha with a Synernet last name, something like that. And it's beckoning back to an earlier name for the second pharaoh that ever existed after the Narmer situation. If you look at the lineage of it, it says Horaha. And a lot of people have made connections and say, okay, well, this statue actually came from back then. And even though we found it in this 12th burial, it's the old style where they didn't stylize it as much. In fact, has the realism looking face, which looks like my friend Eric. But there we have those blue crystal eyes that I've made videos about. You can look at it in my things there. These crystal blue eyes that they made, and they look like real eyes. They follow you around the room, but better yet, they're actually made out of real crystal, and they separate the back spot enough to where it really looks like real eyes. Kind of a strange crystal that they make them out of too, that they're not able to fractionate and analyze totally, but in this crystal it kind of looks grayish blue, and when you get just right on them it turns more blue, more lined up with them. It also seems that there's slight variations that are more violet and more rich blue and so on, and each one seems to be pretty well matched with each other. So this Horaha might be second pharaoh ever, and we've talked about him. I've got a video about it, and people say that, oh, that might be King Scorpion, and that this might be that, and this is probably Horus the Younger. And so that's the way it fits into it, coming into it. And this is Seth Peribsen, and here is Set and everything else that they start to worship later. And who was Osiris? Well, we just talked about the Asir. And it's funny, we can make connections of the Asir way up in these Proto-European where we're talking about. We can make connections that go from that all the way over to the people who brought Thor and all of that happened and going on there, and the Asir that he's got. But also, that's the name, Asir, of Osiris. Yeah, it's very similar. In fact, strange, funny way in old Scottish or Irish, you have the O in front of things meaning of, and so it's of Cyrus. Sire is also a cattle. Whenever you have a cow and it's the major one that's the breeder of all of them, he's my sire that's out there. Funny how that all works together, and Hathor and the cows and everything else, and sires, and well, if here's the sire, well, they're the sire of thousands. Some of these people had hundreds of kids, and you take that lineage on, all it takes about 4 or 5 generations, and it becomes thousands of people that are all connected to these people. So like in the earlier video, it said all these blue-eyed people are supposedly somewhere around 68,000 BC, all connected to this guy that lived around the Black Sea back that time. But I'm also telling you there were other people that had blue eyes. But just that person, just like say Genghis Khan is from, they have so many people that are related to him and so on that come out of it. These same people have that same connection. But did he have a father and a granddad and everybody? Sure he did. How old are blue-eyed traits? Well, a genealogy look back said light skin and eye trait has gone back some 600,000 years. It was in the Neanderthals and all of these guys, and they pulled it off. But it becomes a blanket over mankind about 60,000 years. And in fact, it becomes all over Europe and stuff and really eats it up here some 6,000 years ago. And that kind of fits with that whole timeline too. And isn't it weird how that all broke down in 600 to 60 to 666? What the hell's going on here? Well, let's just continue.
In Egyptian, Hyksos means foreign rulers, and they introduced the horse, chariot, and bronze medal to the African continent, as well as Aten worship, which is considered the first form of monotheism, meaning the belief in one God, which in this case is symbolized by the sun. Josephus calls them the shepherd kings, and anthropologically speaking, they entered Egypt via the Middle East, starting from Anatolia.
Dishwashers.
So now things should start falling into place, as the Scythians were blonde and red-haired and had blue eyes, just like many of the Egyptian statues, and a phenotype common in Scotland and Ireland. The Ashkenazi Jews also predominantly have fair hair.
They do, and people made a fit about her whenever it came out and did a recreation of her. If you look, she has a blue eye, one left in there and everything. And of course, there's been this big contest of whether or not it's her or that other maiden that was ended up being the son or the mother and so on, and who's Nefertiti and who's this, that, and the other. Well, once they did the recreation and they put it up beside the statue, they go, that's her or them. They looked alike with the other one that's talking about. So that's got to be, that's probably, yeah, there we go. So Oddly, though, she has that crystal eye. He has it at 12th dynasty, if that's a 12th dynasty Horaha. But could be the second pharaoh that ever existed, and a later statue somewhat made, but 12th dynasty is whenever they quit it, so it's ironic. He would have been the last ones, and if you put his statue before that, it's really peters out in 6th, 7th, 8th, and then there's about 3 or 4 that they don't use them, and all of a sudden here's one, and then all of a sudden they don't use them for a hell of a lot of dynasties till we get to Nefertiti, and then all of a sudden she's got one left. Yeah, that's strange. So these Ashkenazi Jew types have this same phenotype.
And light eyes. In Islamic tradition, 36 languages of the world could be traced back to Japheth, and he's usually regarded as the ancestor of the Gog and Magog tribes, and at times of the Turks, Khazars, Illyrians, Dacians, and Eastern Europeans around the Ukraine. That said, many of the last Scythians were absorbed into what today are called Slavic people, who are also fair-haired with light eyes.
And if you'll look here, we'll see a horseman going right, and then we see these horse people that are here, and you can tell that these couldn't be the exact same culture. Well, I'm telling you, they're pretty much the exact same people, but a slightly different culture from each other. For if you looked real close, this is painted up quite well, and that's a woman. Yeah, that's a woman. Yep. And she is on a horse. But hey, if you watch the Scottish show and things that tells you about the ancient tales and folklore of Brave, the cartoon for kids that has the starting redhead girl that rides the horses and shoots the arrows and does the things and is pretty headstrong, I think we can see a connection there too. These ancient people that are connected to horses that a lot of people are nowadays, for a reason.
The Polish can also claim descent from the ancient Iranian Sarmatians, part of the wider Scythian cultures, making up the dominant Baroque culture and ideology of the nobility that existed in the times of the Renaissance to the 18th centuries, that also extended into Ukraine and Russia, which is why Russian money from pre-communist times boldly bears Aryan symbology prominently in the middle of the currency.
Now, this isn't a time before whoopsie, as we will say, and it went to a different way and started forming a communist type thing. It was also, if you'll look back into it, it's done by somebody else we can't talk about. Let's continue.
As I've stated several times before, the Prophet Muhammad himself had red hair, which brings us to the Khazars. When one looks at a map of Indo-European or Aryan expansions and compares it to a map of the Khazarian Empire, the similarities should speak for itself. The same geographic area attributed to Ashkenazis as they're ethnically one and the same. I'll also include a link in the description to a prior video I did about the Templars, a German sect that settled Haifa a century before Israel's independence, which today is largely populated by Germanic Ashkenazi people whose ancestors arrived on nationalist socialist ships from 1933 to 1939 in a secret agreement that is historically factual, even if no longer publicized.
Now, here we're going to watch something that's from another news clip about the same type of situation he's talking about, but that was from Saturday, 22nd of January, 1938. You can pause and read it. We're about to even continue going on.
I lived in Palestine from 1933 to 1936, and we saw every week transports of German Jews come.
See if I can catch this together.
To settle in Palestine.
German Jewish settlement of Palestine was, for a time, official Nazi policy. These photos of Jewish life in Palestine, along with a lengthy text, appeared in 1934 in the Berlin paper Der Angry. A Nazi Visits Palestine was the title of the multi-part series. A medal was struck by Goebbels in commemoration. On one side, the swastika. On the other, the Star of David.
These same Indo-European Aryans, who were the Hyksos pharaohs, were not only linked to the Phoenicians, which means red, but were also the Knights Templar, the people who conducted the Crusades, which were a series of wars by Europeans to recover the Holy Land from Muslims in the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries.
Which ended kind of badly because of another reason that we probably can't quite go into. But if you'll look, there were different hats worn by the pharaohs. And if we take just the color symbology and not even the symbology of the cone, the tongue of the butterfly, and the blue helmet, and just say red, white, and blue, and how many connected flags there are to this day that still hold this color figuration, starts to make a lot of connections. But as he states here, it carried through the Crusades in this time when people had came back and tried to recapture the Holy Land before things had happened, but of course that kind of ended badly.
And carved stone churches out of rock in Lalibela, Ethiopia, including swastikas and Star of David, or Steel of Solomon if you prefer, symbols with the Templar cross in the middle of it. It has also been suggested by many authors, such as Sigmund Freud, in his book Moses and Monotheism, that Moses was actually born into an Egyptian household, rather than being born as a slave and merely raised in the Egyptian royal household, and was himself royalty, with many others also concluding that the noble bloodlines of the biblical Israelites were synonymous with the Hyksos pharaohs, both associated with serpent symbolism, which ties into the legend of Saint Patrick, who drove the snakes out of Ireland, since Ireland never had snakes during the entire Holocene.
Never.
And before that was covered by a mile of ice. So it's clear the snakes represented pagans, which is another way of saying druids. The druids were the Scythian royalty, and this bloodline were also known as dragons. And
so now we're able to carry this serpent symbology all the way through, but if we look at the idea of a flying serpent that they had going on in this sun disk and flying symbology and this connective that worked with each other and how they work with each other symbolically, you start to make more connections with people and ancient things. But man, I had something to say about what he had said just before that, but he ran through three things there and I wanted to back it up one, but I'll let him go ahead and speak. Oh yeah, he's trying to compare it to, so that Hyksos, that's the thing that we connect with the Bible and the biblical story that goes on. It's people have made connections to that. It never says the Red Sea, it says the Sea of Reeds, Yam Suf. In the Bible itself is what it says, if you look at the old ones. So there's a connection too of these people that came out of it. But there's a recent article that said the people in the Delta at that time were already those people. It wasn't an invasion in any way, shape, or form. Got a video I did about it, but there's a better one that came out, and I didn't want to double up on something, but I may do it soon and put that out and show you that the people living there at the time that ran in, and Avaras and all these things that you see in some of these Hollywood movies where they try to find the Ark of the Covenant, why the hell would they be looking there? Well, there's a reason for that. We're going to go on to part 3 and start right here in it. If you haven't seen part 1, you're going to have to go to end of part 3 and go back to 1, and I'll make them connect each other. We'll see y'all there. Peace.